Jimmy Carter did an event with Bernie Sanders a few days ago at the Carter Center, and he gave a brilliant answer when asked about the rise of Trump and authoritarianism.
And how do you both explain the rise of authoritarianism? What's this coming from?
Well, I think the root of it is something that I haven't heard discussed much. I told a group today that in 1999, at the end of the last millennium, in the beginning of 2000, I was asked to make speeches in Oslo, Norway, and also in Taiwan. And my subject was, what is the greatest challenge to be faced by the next century? And I said the disparity between rich people and poor people. And I think that is the case not only between people who live in a country, but also between nations. And I believe that the root of a downturn in human rights preceded 2016. It began earlier than that. And I think the reason was the disparity in income, which has been translated into the average person, good, decent, hardworking, middle-class people, feeling that they are getting cheated by the government and by society. And they don't get the same element of health care. They don't get the same quality education. They don't get the same political rights, particularly after the stupid decision of the Supreme Court on Citizens United, where they said that it's an unlimited amount of money going into campaigns. But now they feel that even in politics, their choice of a candidate to be president or governor or congressman or whoever is not the same as a rich person's. And also, once that candidate gets in office, if he's successful, quite often the average person feels that they are repaying their contributions with legal bribery, and it's legal. And the justice system has also gone down. Long before we had this last election, when I left the White House, for instance, 1 out of 1,000 people were in prison. Now, 7 people out of 1,000 are in prison. 7 times as many people who are Americans are now in prison as they were just when I left the White House. So the feeling of an average person that I'll be treated fairly by the justice system is missing. So, basic human rights, income, status in society, health care, education, participation in politics, justice, the things in which we used to have complete faith now have been distorted by the rich people getting richer and the poor people getting poorer. And when the rich people get a candidate in office, they can be sure that the tax laws and everything else are going to keep them getting richer and richer, but the average person suffers. So I think that dissatisfaction with the existing system of politics resulted in the outcome of the election in 2016 in the United States. People were willing just to take a chance and to abandon democracy and what we know about is basic principles and try something new, no matter what it was.
That answer was incredibly thoughtful. It was brilliant, and it's absolutely spot on. You could tell he's thought about this quite a bit. And the argument he's making, to sum it up, in a concise way, is the establishment failed regular people and working people for so long, and it failed them so badly that people were willing to roll the dice on anything that sounded remotely anti-establishment. And that explains the rise of Donald Trump. I mean, you have this really comical kind of character, this bombastic billionaire who kind of says anything, just talks from the cuff. But there was this sense of authenticity about him that, you certainly didn't get from a robot like Hillary Clinton. And then you just sprinkle in a little bit of the populist anti-establishment rhetoric. Remember, on the campaign trail, Trump would rail against Wall Street. He railed against Ted Cruz taking Goldman Sachs money and Hillary Clinton in her Wall Street speeches, and said, I'm going to keep your job here. I'm not going to ship out your job. We're going to stop the wars. We're going to bring the troops home, and we're going to rebuild here. And look, he was a liar. He lied about all that. Shameless in that regard. But you know what? The rhetoric swayed people enough. And the Democrats lost the Rust Belt, which was the Democratic firewall. Hillary didn't even step foot to fucking campaign in some of those states. And now we see the results. And the bottom line is you couldn't have the rise of a Donald Trump if the establishment hadn't failed people so thoroughly. And from the late 1970s and onward, with the introduction of money in politics and the idea, totally made up, that money equals free speech and you have legalized bribery now, ever since then, the U.S. has slowly but surely began to function as an oligarchy, where the politicians represent the rich and the corporations, and not the middle class and not the poor, not regular people. There's no, according to the Princeton study, there's no correlation between what regular people want and the policies we end up getting. But there is a correlation between what the rich want and the corporations want and the policies we end up getting. So in that system, and in a system where you have Congress, which is a 20% approval rating, that's what it is right now, like, what do you expect to happen? When the so-called center, the establishment, fails, people will either go far right or far left. People will either go populist right or populist left. They went with what they thought was populist right with Trump. Obviously, it wasn't. And now it's now just standard establishment bullshit. He's totally sold out, appointing Goldman Sachs everywhere, listening to the neocons and the deep state. So, you didn't actually get populist right. But now the solution is just waiting for us, man. Populist left. It's the person sitting just to the right of Jimmy Carter in that segment, Bernie Sanders. And look, Bernie Sanders, he almost did it then. He almost did it in the last election. Remember, entire corporate media against him. They'd show Trump's empty podium before they show a Bernie Sanders speech. Corporate media 100% against him. DNC tipping the scales against him from behind the scenes. Guy with virtually no name recognition going up against the biggest political juggernaut in American history. Went from 0% to 47% is what he got of the vote when all was said and done. And he won 22 states. The political revolution almost came to fruition. So populist left will win. And that's our answer. That's how we save this situation. Because it's true that as a result of the establishment failing people for so long, people said anything but that. And when you have half the country making $30,000 a year or less, when you have over 70% of the American people living paycheck to paycheck, when you have people dying because they don't have access to basic health care, you have premiums that are higher than ever, you have the worst quality of care ever, you have rampant militarism where we're blowing our resources overseas when Flint doesn't even have clean water. When you have all those problems, people are going to say anything but the status quo. So now it's time to give them not the status quo, but from the left, and not the pseudo faux populism of Trump and the right.